They started cutting across my land like it didn't belong to anybody, like it was just empty space between where they were and where they wanted to go. At first I told myself it was nothing, just a couple carts taking a wrong turn, but then I realized something that didn't sit right with me. They weren't getting lost, they were choosing it. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. I live just outside a private recreational community called Ridge Hollow. Not inside it, not part of it, just close enough to hear the hum of golf carts all day long. That soft electric where that never really stops. My place sits right along their outer boundary, and there's no fence, no clean line, just a natural break where their manicured paths end and my land begins, and my side isn't pretty. It's uneven, a little wild, native grass, some low ridges, patches where the soil's a bit loose depending on the season. Not the kind of place you'd mistake for part of a golf course unless you were trying to. There's this one stretch, though, a narrow slope that dips down gently before flattening out again. Nothing dramatic, but smooth enough that if you were looking for a shortcut, your eyes would land there. And apparently, someone's did. First time I noticed it, it was just one set of tracks, faint, like someone hesitated halfway through. I remember standing there that morning, coffee in hand, looking at it, and thinking, didn't think much of it. People wander, right? But a few days later, there were more. Not a lot, just enough to catch your eye. A second line cutting through the grass, then a third, slightly deeper, slightly more confident. Like whoever came after the first guy figured, well, someone's already been through here, must be fine. And that's the thing about people. You don't need permission if you've got precedent. By the end of the second week, it wasn't random anymore. It was a path. Not official, not marked, but clear. Clear enough that if you were new to the area, you'd assume it had always been there. The grass started thinning out, the soil getting pressed down, and after a bit of rain, those tire tracks would sit there like impressions in memory, long after the carts were gone. I told myself I should probably do something. Maybe put up a sign, maybe talk to someone over at Ridge Hollow, but every time I thought about it, something held me back. Not fear exactly, more like curiosity. Because nobody had asked. No one knocked on my door, no one waved me down and said, "Hey, mind if we cut through here?" They just did it. Quietly. Repeatedly. Like if you do something enough times, it stops being wrong and starts being normal. I remember mentioning it to my neighbor, Carl. He's got a place a little further down the road, been there longer than me, the kind of guy who's seen every version of this kind of thing. We were leaning against his truck one evening, watching a couple carts drift along the edge of the property line, and I said, "You ever have folks come through your land like that?" He didn't even look surprised. Just took a sip from his bottle and went, "They'll take whatever you don't defend." I laughed a little, but it didn't feel funny. "Yeah, but it's not like they're breaking anything," I said. "They're just passing through." Carl looked over at me then, real slow, like he was choosing his words. "That's how it starts. Nobody breaks anything. They just act like it ain't yours." That stuck with me longer than I expected. Because he was right, nothing dramatic was happening. No gates torn down, no damage I couldn't fix. But there was something about it, the assumption, the quiet kind of taking. And the more it happened, the more obvious it became that this wasn't accidental anymore. These weren't lost golfers. This was a route. One afternoon, I was out near that slope when a cart came rolling through. Two guys, maybe mid-40s, polos, sunglasses, the whole look. They didn't slow down when they saw me, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge me at all. Just dipped down the slope, crossed right in front of me like I was part of the scenery. I remember calling out, not even aggressive, just, "Hey, you know this isn't part of the course, right?" The driver glanced over, barely, and said, "Yeah, we know. It's quicker this way." Quicker. That was it. No apology, no hesitation. Just efficiency. They were gone before I could even respond, climbing up the other side like they'd done it 100 times. And that's when something shifted for me. Because up until that point, I'd been treating it like a misunderstanding. Like if I just clarified things, it would stop. But standing there, watching those tire marks deepen into the soil, hearing that word echo back at me, quicker, I realized this wasn't about confusion. It was about convenience. And convenience has a way of ignoring boundaries. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. Not just to the carts, but to the land itself. The way the ground responded. Where the soil held firm, where it softened after rain, how water settled along that slope and slowly worked its way downward. The path they'd chosen wasn't random. It followed the easiest grade, the most natural line between 2 points. If I'm being honest, it was a smart shortcut, and that annoyed me more than it should have. Not because they were wrong about it being efficient, but because they were right, and they used that as justification. So I stopped thinking about how to block them, and started thinking about how to let them keep going, just not the way they expected. I didn't say anything to Carl after that, didn't call the community office, didn't put up signs or rope it off. Instead, I grabbed a shovel, a rake, and a couple bags of fine sand I had left over from another project, and I walked out to that slope early one morning before anyone was around. If they wanted a shortcut, I figured I'd give them one. Just a different kind. I didn't rush it, that was the first thing. Whatever I was going to do, it couldn't look like I did anything at all. Because the second you make it obvious, people push back. They argue. They complain. They turn it into a whole thing. But if the land itself changes, if it just stops cooperating, well, there's nothing to argue with. So I worked slow. First morning, I walked the slope like I'd never seen it before, boots sinking just a little where the ground had already started to give. You could tell exactly where the carts had been cutting through. The soil there was tighter, smoother, almost polished in places, like repetition had ironed it flat. And right in the middle of that stretch, there was this shallow depression, nothing you'd notice unless you were looking for it, but water liked to sit there. That was my starting point. I took the shovel and loosened the top layer, not digging deep, just enough to break that compacted crust. Then I raked it out, widened the depression by a few inches, blended the edges so it didn't look touched. After that, I brought in the sand, fine, pale, almost the same color as the soil once it mixed in, and spread it thin across the upper layer. Not a pile. Not obvious. Just enough. The kind of change you feel more than you see. I stepped back when I was done, wiped my hands on my jeans, and looked at it from a distance. Still looked like the same worn strip of earth. Same slope. Same path. Nothing about it said stop. That was the point. I did the same thing again the next morning, and the one after that. A little more loosening here, a little more sand there, always blending, always subtle. By the third day, that stretch of ground wasn't hard anymore. It had give to it. Not enough to collapse under weight, but enough to shift. Enough to take energy out of anything rolling across it. And then I waited. Late afternoon, just like clockwork, I heard that familiar hum coming from the Ridge Hollow side. I didn't go out right away. I stayed back on the porch, out of sight, just watching through the trees. First cart came through easy. 2 older women this time. Chatting, not paying much attention. They dipped down the slope like they always did, and for a second, nothing happened. Then about halfway through, you could see it. The front tires sank just a little deeper than expected. Not dramatic, just enough to slow them down. One of them leaned forward, said something I couldn't hear, and the driver gave it a little more throttle. The cart pushed through, climbed out the other side, but it wasn't smooth. There was hesitation now. They didn't come back that way. Second cart came maybe 10 minutes later. Different story. This one had a guy driving, younger, probably thought he knew what he was doing. He came in faster, didn't slow at the top of the slope, just rolled straight down like it was nothing. And for the first few seconds, it was nothing. Then the rear wheels hit that softened patch. You could hear it from where I was. That dry, grinding spin of rubber losing traction. The back end dipped, kicked up a spray of sand, and the whole cart kind of lurched sideways. Come on, he muttered, loud enough that I caught it. He tried to power through, press down harder, but that only made it worse. The wheels dug in deeper, churning up more sand, burying themselves inch by inch. The cart didn't move forward, just down. He stopped, reversed a little, tried again at a different angle. Same result. By now his passenger was laughing, not in a mean way, more like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Maybe we should just go around, man. He shook his head. Nah, it's fine, I got it. He didn't. Took him a good 2, maybe 3 minutes of rocking back and forth, easing the throttle, trying to find grip before he finally clawed his way out. By the time he made it up the other side, the middle of that slope looked completely different, churned, loose, unstable. And that was just one pass. The third cart came through right as the sun was starting to drop, shadows stretching long across the ground. This time, I walked out a little closer, stayed off to the side, just enough to see without being in the way. It was the same guy I'd talked to a few days earlier, the quicker this way guy. He slowed when he saw the slope. Not by much, but enough to tell he noticed something had changed. His passenger looked down at the ground, frowned. That wasn't like that before. Driver shrugged. Probably just loose dirt. Happens. And then he drove straight into it. Front wheels dipped. Pause. Then the back wheels followed, and that's when it hit. The cart sank just enough to kill the momentum completely. Not stuck immediately, but close. He tried to push through it, same as the last guy. Same mistake. The wheels spun, sand kicked up, and I swear you could feel the frustration in the air. It wasn't just about getting across anymore. It was about proving he could. Seriously? He snapped, gripping the wheel tighter. His passenger glanced over at me then, finally noticing I was standing there. Hey, is this your land? I nodded. Yeah. He gestured toward the slope. You know it's all soft right there? I shrugged, kept my voice even. Ground's always been like that. Just depends how you hit it. That wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't a lie either. The driver looked at me, something sharp behind his sunglasses. We've been coming through here for weeks. Never had a problem. I tilted my head slightly. Maybe you've just been lucky. There was a pause, not long, but long enough. Then he tried again. And again, it didn't work. Took him longer than the last guy to get out. Longer to accept that the shortcut wasn't acting like a shortcut anymore. By the time they finally made it across, neither of them said another word. They just drove off, slower this time. That evening, I walked back down to the slope and looked at what had changed. It was working maybe a little too well. The more they tried to use it, the worse it got. The sand wasn't just sitting there anymore. It was being churned, mixed deeper into the soil, spreading out, widening the soft zone. What had started as a narrow strip was beginning to grow, not in a neat line, but in uneven patches where tires had spun and dug and failed. And I didn't have to touch it anymore. That was the part one hadn't expected. The land was doing the rest on its own. Next day, fewer carts. Not none, but fewer. The ones that did come through moved slower, more cautious. A couple of them stopped at the top of the slope, just looked at it for a second, like they were trying to decide if it was worth it. Some turned around right there. Others tried anyway. Most of them regretted it. By midweek, word had started to spread. You could tell. Carts would approach the edge of my property, pause, and then veer off back toward the designated path. No signs, no warnings, just quiet understanding passing from one person to another. Hey, don't go that way. It's not worth it. Carl came by around that time, pulled up in his truck and just sat there for a minute, watching a cart hesitate at the top of the slope before turning away. He let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. I leaned against the fence post nearby. What? He nodded toward the ground. You didn't block it. Nope. You didn't tell him to stop. I shook my head. He looked at me then, a slow grin creeping in. You let him figure it out. I smiled a little. Seemed more effective. He laughed, that deep kind that comes from the chest. That's cold, man. Not really, I said, glancing back at the slope. Just letting things behave the way they naturally would. Carl followed my gaze, watching as another cart rolled up, paused, and turned away without even trying. Yeah, he said after a moment. Funny how that works. By the end of the week, almost no one used it. The path was still there, visible if you knew where to look. But it didn't invite you anymore. It didn't feel easy. It didn't promise anything. It just sat there, quiet, soft, and unwilling. And that changed everything. By the end of that week, the shortcut was basically dead, not officially, not blocked off, nothing dramatic like that. It just stopped working, and people stopped trusting it. And once trust is gone, it doesn't matter how short a path is, nobody wants to be the one stuck halfway through it, spinning their wheels while someone else watches. The interesting part wasn't that they stopped, it was how fast they adapted. Carts that used to drift casually toward my side of the boundary now stayed cleanly on their own paths, like they suddenly remembered where those lines were supposed to be. No one announced it. No meeting, no notice posted anywhere, just quiet correction. And honestly, that was all I wanted. I didn't need an apology. Didn't need anyone to come knock on my door and admit they'd been cutting through. I just wanted the assumption gone. That quiet little idea that my land was up for grabs as long as it was convenient. A couple days later, we got rain. Not a storm, nothing heavy, just a steady, soaking kind that settles in and takes its time. I stood out on the porch that morning watching it fall, seeing how the water moved across the ground, how it gathered along that slope and sank into the loosened soil. By the time it cleared, the whole stretch had changed again. The churned sand had settled, smoothed out just enough to blend with the surrounding earth. The deeper ruts softened, edges blurred, and along the sides, grass started creeping back in, like it had been waiting for a chance. But the center? Still soft. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just unreliable. The kind of ground you don't test twice. I walked down there later that afternoon, boots pressing lightly into the surface, feeling that give under my weight, and I remember thinking, this is done. Or at least, I thought it was. Because a few days after that, I heard a cart again. Not the usual distant hum. This one was closer. Slower. Deliberate. I stepped out from the side of the house and saw it coming along the edge of the boundary, heading straight toward that old path. 2 people in it. Driver I didn't recognize, but the passenger, that was him. Quicker this way. He saw me this time. No pretending otherwise. They rolled to a stop just before the slope, engine still humming, and for a second neither of us said anything. Just stood there, looking at each other across that stretch of ground that had caused all this quiet friction. He took off his sunglasses, leaned slightly out of the cart. You did something to it. Not a question. I walked a little closer, hands in my pockets. Did I? He glanced down at the slope, then back at me. This wasn't like this before. I shrugged. Ground changes. Rain, used, depends on how it's treated. There was a flicker of irritation in his expression, but also something else, something like reluctant understanding. His driver spoke up, a little unsure. We can probably still make it, right? He didn't answer right away. Just kept looking at me. You could try, I said, calm. Some people do. That hung there for a second. Then he let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Shook his head, leaned back into the seat. Nah, he said. Not worth it. And just like that, he turned the wheel. No argument. No confrontation. No big moment where anyone had to win. They just left. I stood there watching the cart disappear back toward the paved path, and there was this strange mix of feelings that settled in. Not satisfaction exactly. Not victory. Something quieter than that. More like balance. Because the truth is, I could have handled it differently. I could have put up signs, called the HOA, made a big deal out of it. Maybe I would have been in the right. Maybe I would have gotten an official solution. But it would have turned into something else too. Complaints, tension, sides being taken. Me versus them. And that's never really what I wanted. What bothered me wasn't the carts, it was the assumption behind them. That if something isn't actively defended, it's available. That convenience somehow outweighs ownership. And the funny thing is, I didn't fight that assumption head on. I just let it fail on its own. After that day, I didn't see him again. Not up close, anyway. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of carts moving along their proper routes, staying where they were supposed to be, like that invisible boundary had finally become real again. Carl came by one evening not long after, same as before, leaning against his truck, looking out over the land. Quiet, he said. Yeah, I replied. He nodded toward the slope. They done. I followed his gaze. Seems like it. He was quiet for a second, then smirked a little. You ever think about what would have happened if you just told him no? I thought about that, really thought about it. Yeah, I said finally. I think they would have kept coming anyway. Just slower. Maybe more careful. Carl chuckled. Yeah, people don't like being told no. No, I agreed. But they do pay attention when something stops working. He gave me that look again, like he had the first time we talked about it. You didn't stop him, he said. You made it not worth it. I smiled slightly. Something like that. We stood there a while longer, just watching the wind move through the grass. That same stretch of land now blending back into itself like nothing had ever happened. From a distance, you really couldn't tell. The path was still there if you knew where to look. A faint line, a memory more than anything. But it didn't invite you anymore. Didn't suggest anything. It just existed. And maybe that's the part that stuck with me the most. Because land doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It doesn't care about who thinks what belongs to who. It just responds. You push on it the wrong way, it gives. You take from it without understanding it, it changes. And sometimes, it stops carrying you altogether. I never fixed the path. Didn't need to. It fixed itself. Once people stopped forcing it to be something it wasn't. And every now and then, I still walk out there, stand at the top of that slope, and look down at that stretch of ground that caused all this quiet trouble. There's something almost peaceful about it now, like it finally gets to be what it was supposed to be all along. Not a shortcut, just mine. Now here's the part one keep going back to, and I'm curious what you think. Was that fair? I didn't warn them. I didn't tell them what I changed. I let them find out the hard way, let frustration do the talking instead of me. Some people would say that's justified, my land, my rules, right? Others might say I set a trap, that I could have handled it more directly, more honestly. So I don't know. What do you think? Was that a reasonable way to deal with it? Or did I cross a line without saying a word? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect. And if you've ever had someone treat your space like it didn't belong to you, I'd really like to hear how you handled it.